Hi, I'm Paris, and this is the story of my misadventure in climbing Guadalupe Peak last weekend. Guadalupe Peak is the highest point in Texas at about 8,750 feet. Not really tall as mountains go. When I lived in Japan, I climbed Mount Fuji, which is about 12,000 feet, but Guadalupe Peak is a lot more remote. Maybe 50 people climbed it the day that I climbed it, whereas Mount Fuji, I think it's like non-stop people, a few thousand every day. The other thing Mount Fuji had was vending machines at the top. I am not joking, and I sure could have used that climbing Guadalupe Peak. When I get a little further into the story, you'll understand why. So 5 years ago, on a family trip to see West Texas and New Mexico, Carlsbad Caverns, White Sands, Marfa, Texas, I noticed that the highest point in Texas, Guadalupe Peak, happened to be right in that same area. And I thought, well, that'd be pretty cool if we could hike up to the highest point in Texas and say we climbed that. So on that trip, we gave it a try. We hiked up to a point that we thought was about halfway up, but the kids especially were just wiped out. Didn't seem like they were going to have the energy to go another half and then come all the way back down. So we canned it for that day and said, we'll come back and do this another time when we can start earlier in the day and we're in better shape. Yeah, because that's always going to happen. So that was 5 years ago. And in the time since, Guadalupe Peak on the horizon out there in West Texas has sort of become my white whale, something I would think about from time to time. I've really got to get back there. I really want to be able to say I've climbed to the highest point in Texas. So I received from a company called EvoCrest these trekking poles to try out, which was coincidental because in my first time climbing, I saw people zooming up past us and hurrying back down the mountain with trekking poles, and that made it look so much easier. So I always wanted a pair of these, didn't own it. They sent me some. Really got me thinking, I got to get back and climb Guadalupe Peak this spring before it gets too hot to do in the summertime. So we were going to go back and climb as a family. No one was quite as enthusiastic about it as myself, but they were willing to go along. But then plans changed, things came up, we had to cancel it, postpone it, and it's gotten to the point now in mid-April where I thought if I wait much longer, it's going to be too hot, I won't be able to go. So even though the rest of the family is busy, I'm just going to go by myself. Big mistake, hiking by yourself, which I learned on this trip. And I think nature may have been trying to indicate that to me because a few hours after leaving Austin, it's about 7 hours to drive out to the nearest town in West Texas for doing the climb. After a few hours, and I was just entering West Texas, a windstorm, which I had known was coming, came through 30, 40 mile an hour winds, but it brought up a huge dust storm. So driving through that was a chore, but I was not about to be turned around and I had to drive slower in the dust storm, but finally got through the other side, got to the hotel to stay for the night, and thought I had everything well prepared for the hour drive the next morning up to the mountain, register at the visitor center, and get climbing. I actually started the climb up about 8:30 in the morning, which should have been plenty of time. And there were about 20 or so other people there at the visitor center checking in, getting advice on the hike and so forth. I had my pack. I had several bottles of water. I had a scarf, gloves. I was wearing a heavy winter coat because the forecast, when I got to the top, it was supposed to be about 37 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, it was a cold front that had blown through. Turned out, though, it was a sunny day and a lot of the trail was sheltered from the wind. So actually how I was dressed was so hot, and I was sweating most of the way up during the climb. Remember that, because it factors in later. Now I brought along my 4K camera, another regular camera with the zoom, my 360 camera, various other, my backup battery for my phone. So the pack was seeming kind of heavy, and I didn't bring as much water as they had recommended. I brought what I thought would be enough water for the 6 to 8 hour round trip hike that it was supposed to be. That's the estimate for most people. Make a note of that point too. And I brought some snacks, but not the junk food kind of snacks, because I've been trying to stay away from the junk food. But when you are climbing a mountain and burning thousands of calories, it's actually those high carb things that you want to have. Instead, I had packs of almonds and a trail mix, but it wasn't trail mix with chocolate. It was more cranberries, raisin, chicken jerky, that sort of stuff. And not having some chocolate and energy bars, That was another mistake that I made. So I started up climbing just after 8:30 in the morning. Other people passing me by. A few people that I would pass them, and then they would take a break and rest a little, and then I would come up ahead of them. But by the time I got about halfway up, I would say, the people who passed me, I didn't pass them again. I didn't see them again until they were on their way down. I wasn't going up particularly quickly. I didn't have a whole lot of energy, maybe because I was low on carbs and I didn't have the carb-filled snacks. I was also hot and sweating and not in as good a shape as I convinced myself that I was. So after I got to the halfway point and further, let me show you a couple clips here. If you listen to the tone of my voice and how raspy my dry throat was getting, that's a clue too. That outcropping of rocks there, that's how far I made it on my first attempt with Roxana and Jimena. We got around that corner and then went to come along the cliff here. Well, the drop off, and it was so windy, so we turned around and went back. I think I'm 2/3 of the way up. I'd like to think 3/4, but not quite. This vista is facing south. So a couple times I came very close to saying it's just too much further and just going back, but then no, I know I am never going to come back here and do this again. If I don't do it this time, it's not going to happen. After 4 hours of climbing, I come around the bend and see I have this much further to go. It's like I haven't even started yet. So with that, I would push myself a little further, and the next time I thought, I should just turn around. It turned out there was a downhill stretch for a while that made it a little easier. And the people coming down were being very encouraging. Oh yeah, you only got about another hour. Oh, the view is great. You're gonna love it. Keep going. So people encouraged me and I kept on going. One last surprise. Around the corner, it's the marker indicating the summit. 6.5 hours after starting out, I made it to the summit. And it's cool up there. You have that 360 view. There's the big metal triangle. There's the ammo can with the journal so that you can sign your name, when you climbed, where you're from, and put in a comment. So I spent about 40 minutes up at the top recovering some energy. I actually did a brief video review for my other YouTube channel of these trekking poles. Top of Guadalupe Peak. You can see in all directions. So I started back down about 3:40, figured it would take 2 or 3 hours, but the lack of energy that I felt returned very quickly. And so even though it was all pretty much downhill going back, I just couldn't keep up any kind of pace. I was using the trekking poles to move along, but it was a slow walk. I realized I was just plain out of energy and I didn't have any quick energy boost snacks. I tried snacking on the nuts and the trail mix, but that really didn't give me a lot of energy. I also noticed that in the process of climbing up, I had consumed most of my water, and about an hour after leaving the top, I had maybe about 8 ounces of water left. So I kept plugging along at it for another hour, and then I noticed something a little odd. It's that my right hand was getting cold, and this was still like, I don't know, 5:45, 6 o'clock. The sun was still up. It didn't feel cold. Why is my hand cold? And as I continued along, I noticed my heart rate was fast. I could hear it in my ear like it was going 100, 120 beats a minute. And this is going downhill. And I realized I wasn't thinking real clearly because the whole heart rate thing was confusing me. And in pretty short order after that, I started feeling really lightheaded and both my hands started tingling, sort of like when you're hyperventilating. I thought, this can't be good. So I've been watching a spot that I thought was about a half to a third of the way down, and I had planned on, I'll stop when I get there, I'll eat some more snacks, I'll drink the rest of my water, see how I feel, but I realized I wasn't going to make it that far. So I just sat down in the dirt and tried not to panic and tried to remember, has everyone passed me that I saw climbing up already? And Worked on slowing my breathing down. After about 10 minutes, my hands stopped tingling. I thought I could be dehydrated. I could have electrolyte imbalance, the salt potassium stuff. When you don't have enough fluids, that can get messed up. Could be a number of things, but I couldn't Google it out there. I decided to try to cover all bases, and so I took the food that I had, and like my nuts, I took a bag of almonds and decided I'd eat them first. But I realized a couple minutes after chewing them that they hadn't turned to mush in my mouth that I could swallow. Instead, they were just more like shredded dry almonds. And I realized then I had no saliva. So that made me think dehydration. Now, I didn't bring as much water as they had recommended. I'd been sweating most of the way up because I was expecting a cold, windy day, but it was actually sunny and warm. And I was counting on 6 to 8 hours for the whole round trip. But at this point, I'd been hiking for nearly 10 hours, and it was over an hour and a half of fairly steep descent ahead of me still, and I had no idea how long that was going to take. But I did know in about 2.5 hours it would be completely dark. Guess who forgot to bring a flashlight? Now, I had my phone, and I also had a battery backup, so I could have had several hours of light from that. The problem was, and this was assuming I could get past this point where I'm sitting in the dirt, wondering if my heart's going to slow back down, wondering if the lightheadedness is going to pass so I can even stand back up again. But I'm thinking, these trekking poles are really the only reason I haven't fallen off a cliff, because relying on my own 2 feet to balance me when I was walking like in a stupor, I could easily have gone over a rock or gone over an edge. So these things were really what was keeping me on the trail. How was I going to use these and have a light so I could see where I was walking? Anyhow, couldn't swallow the shredded almond mixture in my mouth, and I'm looking at my bottle of water, about 4 ounces left. So I thought, well, I need the water, but I need to have food as well. So I washed down the almonds. I got my other trail mix, and I was feeling nauseous when I opened that up with the dried chicken jerky and the cranberries and the other stuff. It just so nauseating, but I knew I had to have some calories, and I knew I had to have some water, so I forced myself to chew it, washed that down, had some more, washed it down, and then waited to see how I felt. After about another 10 minutes of not seeing anybody else out there and not sure whether there was anybody back up behind me that might come and pass me by to offer some assistance, I did start to feel better. So I got back up, and I couldn't go very fast, but every step was one step closer to the bottom. And I realized the 4 ounces and the trail mix, that was not going to last me through another hour and a half or 2 hours of climbing down the mountain. And sure enough, after about another half hour, the symptoms started to come back. But now I had no more water, and all I had was some dry trail mix to eat, but no saliva to be able to swallow it. Not sure what to do except keep going and see if power of will could keep me standing and keep me moving forward, even with everything else going on. It was right about that time I heard somebody coming down the trail behind me. It was one of those speed walker people who can climb a mountain and come back down in like 2 hours. And I asked him if he had some water. I didn't think he did because he didn't have a pack. He just had like a vest with stuff in it. He said sure, and I guess he had some kind of a system with like a straw and different water packs. And he had one water pack left, which he disconnected and took out, and he poured it into my bottle and said, "You can have the rest of my water." Well, I don't want to take your water if you need it for getting down. But he said, "No, I'll be down at the bottom in half an hour." And I still had an hour and a half, 2 hours still to go. So I accepted his very generous, giving me the last of the water he had. It was about 8 ounces, and that is what let me get down the mountain. Without that, I'm not quite sure what would have happened. As he was pouring the last of the water into my bottle, he told me, "Hey, we've all got to take care of each other out here." Thank goodness for that selfless, generous attitude, and I definitely have some kindness now that I need to pay forward. So I drank a few ounces of the water, felt a little bit better, and kept on going down. The sun now was just on the very tops of the mountains. I figured it would be setting in 30 or 40 minutes, and then the darkness would come. So I just couldn't go faster without being afraid I would fall, because I wasn't doing very well. Even without the dehydration, I just had no energy left in me. So even though they were slow steps, they were steps. And every so often, stop for a sip of water, and I made that water last till I got down to the bottom, which I did. It was very last part of dusk, so I could just sort of see the trail and an occasional rock here and there. And then it leveled out, and there was the parking lot. 10 minutes later, pitch completely dark. No vending machines at the bottom of the mountain, but they had just what I needed, a drinking fountain. So I was able to have a bottle of water, fill it up, take it to the car, and then it was about an hour drive back to the town where I was staying, and I knew I needed liquids, and I needed some carbs. The only place, it was about 10 o'clock at night by this point, and the only place that was open was McDonald's. I went through the drive-thru and I ordered a sweet tea and a couple burgers. And the woman working there handed me the sweet tea first, and then you close that little slidey window, and I'm still waiting there with my window down for the burgers, and put the straw in it and drank it. And I actually moaned out loud. It tasted so good. It was cold, it was sweet, it was liquid. And then I realized after sipping that, that I was moaning out loud, and I worried, do they have a microphone on the outside of that little window? I should probably put this aside and stop moaning at McDonald's. Back at the room, I had a little bit to eat, still felt so nauseous, so I just had to eat a few fries and wait till my stomach could deal with that before having a bite of burger, and a little bit of sweet tea, then some water, a little more sweet tea, then some water. So finally I got rehydrated, but I think I hardly slept that night. Everything hurt so badly. It was just a night of pain, but I did sleep maybe 2 or 3 hours, and then the next day had that 7-hour drive back to Austin. Tomorrow it'll be 1 week since I did that climb, and I'm mostly recovered, and I've learned, or rather relearned, these lessons because I think I used to know these. Number 1, don't hike alone. Number 2, bring as much water as you might actually need, not as little as you think you might get away with bringing. Moaning is not appropriate in the McDonald's drive-thru line. And don't give up. Even if you can't see a way out of things, sometimes the universe will decide to be generous, your fellow human being will decide to be generous and give you, in that moment, just what you need.